There's been a lot to talk about recently since the release of the official trailer of Thomas and Friends Journey Beyond Sodor, including the concept and design of the new characters and the exaggerated moments which will be discussed later. But there is more to all this than just the trailer and behind the scenes videos. So in the end, I decided to give my insight and analysis on what's been covered so far on both sides. It is okay to agree to disagree too. We can all express our opinions, even though we had yet to see the special other than just a minute trailer and 3 minutes featurette. Now the main focus of the subject will be on the experimental engines, Merlin, Zero and Lexi, with other new characters like Hurricane, Frankie and Beresford will also be covered along the way, but that's not much. What is so important to learn about these new characters, their real-life counterparts and learning sensibilities? Why is it a big deal over the exaggerated movements in engines? Let's find out. Each engine is nicely detailed to represent their real-life experimental equivalent. Merlin is the center of attention, as he, amongst all the intriguingly looking new characters, gains huge recognition from various headlines on the day of the official trailer and behind-the-scenes featurette released on YouTube and various news sites, with Downton Abbey actor Hugh Bonneville providing his voice. What is more interesting about Merlin is the choice of his face, created to resemble Hugh Bonneville when he was brought on board to join the cast, which is a happy coincidence to the producers. Amici describes about this choice by saying, "Our director worked on a few different sketches, from which we chose the face which we felt best fitted the character. We chose one which had big, sparkling eyes and defined cheeks as he always laughing. As Merlin tries to make himself invisible, we also wanted to get across a slightly mystical feeling, which we feel his face does well. Merlin is described to be innocent, enthusiastic and caring character in spite of being older than Thomas. In fact, he is based on the real number 783, the LSWR N15 Southern Railway King Arthur class engine, named Sir Gilmere, which fitted with 3 stovepipe chimneys during the Second World War. The purpose for this wartime experiment was to prevent an enemy aircraft from being able to locate the train by its exhaust. Shortly after the war was over, number 783 was reverted back to its conventional form. Come to think of it, the history of Merlin's bases is quite reasonable as to establish why he thinks he has a special ability to make himself disappear, hence why he is called Merlin the Invisible, when really he is likely to be delusional about it. He is amongst the characters I'd be looking forward to see in action when it hits cinemas. Now this is where the next subject would turn out to be a fascinating one. The other 2 experimental engines that have been designed to reflect modern sensibilities. But that was not the first time that the producers ever having to tackle this topic for a children's television show. In fact, the Great Race also represented this by bringing a diverse range of international engines to represent their home country. Zero, who is a geared railway traction engine, is described to be shy, extremely cautious and awkward, especially with the way he functions, when we'll get to later. And even though he has a habit of blunt speaking and his confidence is often jolted, Zero is also genuinely kind and caring, and he would just like to keep himself and his friends hidden and safe from harm. Well, there isn't much about Zero's bases, which was unknown at the moment, unless I'd be completely mistaken, there is something else that is worth noting. With these characteristics of Zero, as hinted by Ian McHugh, who stated that there is an intentional nod to autism, albeit a subtle one for our autistic fanbase, some of whom have become good friends. There is potential in Zero's characteristics that will make him one of the new characters that the audience, even ones with a spectrum, can easily relate to. As you can see, autism has become more of a focus within children's media lately. Earlier this year, Sesame Street introduced a new character named Julia, who has autism. For an educational show on PBS, the producers were not afraid to introduce something new for even the child audience to learn, especially on the subject of autism. But that's not all. When the Power Rangers reboot came out in cinemas, there were many articles saying that the Blue Ranger is autistic. Even if the film doesn't necessarily have to tell us that Billy has autism, his characteristics were clearly shown throughout the story. Show, don't tell. In theory, if that handled well for Billy, why not Zero in Journey Beyond Sodor? I guess we'll never know for certain, but it is best to wait and see how well that will turn out. As my friend Adam Ski says it best,
people with autism have great potential, as long as they don't abuse it.
Now it's the case with another experimental engine named Lexi, who is described to have a nod towards a more fluid approach to gender by the article's author. And even though she is cab forward, which makes her an unuseful engine, she likes to experiment with how she presents herself by often trying out different voices, and how she phrases her expressions just to see which one she thinks works best. What's more, that much like Merlin's wartime experimental bases, Lexi is based on a North Pacific Coast Railroad cab forward 440 number 21 Thomas Stetson by designer Bill Thomas, which was built in 1901 and scrapped in 1905. This particular experimental engine is a rebuild of NPCRR number 5 Bodeger, which was dismantled by 1897. Now, I have witnessed all the commotion that was going on over the fact that whether or not Lexi is described to be gender fluid out of context, and I understand how you're upset over this, which is completely fine if you feel uncomfortable with it. However, there are a couple of things that needed to be addressed here. First off, granted, the trains are machines, but are given characteristics of a human being, hence why they are given a face. Secondly, unless I'd be mistaken, and I'd be happy to acknowledge it, I couldn't see any evidence of quotations that state Lexi is supposedly gender fluid, other than the fact that she is cab forward, not feeling useful, and experimenting with how she presents herself. Thirdly, they're simply fictional anthropomorphic characters with particular traits and human-like personalities that kids and adults can relate to no matter what. In short, all this confusion about Lexi and gender fluid is just an opinion or a theory thought up by the author. Simply put, wait until the film is released and then you can draw your conclusions. Other than that, just as long as it's all handled, I would personally like to thank the producers for taking a bold step with these new characters that represent the feelings and modern sensibilities. Now there's something to give them some credit. Now let's move on to the Steelworks engines, Hurricane and Frankie. Even though there isn't much to learn more about Frankie at the moment, other than the fact that she is based on a Hartshorne Clark 060 diesel shunter which worked at the Manchester Ship Canal. There is something about the history of Hurricane's real-life bases, the experimental GER Class A55 or Decapart, designed by James Alden in 1902. It was known to be the first 10-coupled steam locomotive in Great Britain, and was the largest locomotive ever constructed for the British Railway Company. Sadly, due to a variety of factors including its long wheelbase, limited capacity of coal and water, and how dangerously heavy it was for most bridges, Decapart's lifetime was cut short as it was converted into an 080 goods tender engine in 1906. Very little of the original locomotive was used, apart from 2 cylinders, 4 heavily modified wheel sets, and the front buffer beam. It had a short working life on the Cambridge line, pulling coal trains until its eventual fate in December 1913, whereupon the engine was quietly scrapped as non-standard. Last but not least, Beresford the crane. It came as a big surprise as we had never seen a new crane before prior to the official trailer. Beresford is based on the Stows Hood and Pitt rolling gantry crane located at Bristol Harbour. Now it's time for the big part of the discussion, the exaggerated movements. Now I'll admit that upon my first impressions on the trailer, the movements like that did kind of irked me a little, but in the end I couldn't see a big deal about it, and it would take some time to get used to. However, I wouldn't judge on this too much until I see the film for myself. Furthermore, Thomas, Jokiden and Cars are not the only children's franchises to have exaggerated movements within the character animation. In fact, other shows like Bob the Builder and Busy Bosses feature anthropomorphic characters based on road vehicles that even had the exact same thing in terms of movements. I remember watching these shows years ago, and I had no problems with that at all. I will forget that in some few moments featuring this type of exaggerated movements in engines prior to the special, shuddering, jumping, bobbing, shaking, wobbling, the list goes on. Yes, that's happened before. In fact, there were a couple of people on the internet who made good points on this commotion. I think we all had to be thankful and acknowledge the fact that Thomas is still made for generations of kids to this day. So I reckon that the exaggerated movements will be something for the preschool demographic could likely get a kick out of from this perspective when the movie comes out. If that is the case, it's not all too bad. However, if you're not happy with this change, that's absolutely fine too. I am kind of with you there. We're all entitled to our opinions. And that basically wraps up for the editorial video on all new characters in the special as well as the exaggerated movements. You can leave the comments below to express your opinions on what's been discussed. This is Murphy Dan, signing off, and thank you for watching.